Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to WatchBox, and thanks for logging on. Today we are waking up with watches, and everything you see is for sale. Reach out to me directly at this email address. That's my email address, tmosso@thewatchbox.com, for pricing on any watch you see here, or reach out to me. I am always looking to buy and build inventory. Buy, trade, or sell, reach out to me at tmosso@thewatchbox.com. In particular, I do like to buy watches. We pay cash, we pay fast, we will buy your whole collection. Right out of the gate, let's get started with the clickbait. I promised you a Diver 300 meter, and here it is, the latest version, 42 millimeters in steel, of the Omega Seamaster Diver 300 meter, a watch that traces its aesthetic origins back to 1993. This is now by far the longest-lived Seamaster design since the model line's debut back in 1948. It has staying power that we can finally compare to the evergreen Rolex Submariner. Of course, like the Sub, it's been worn on the wrist of James Bond. This particular style with the skeleton hands and the lyre lugs, the wave dial, and the blue bezel, made famous on the wrist of Pierce Brosnan during his 4-film turn as 007. The first one in GoldenEye was actually a quartz model. Then for the last 3 Brosnan Bonds, he wore the chronometer version, and this is the latest version of that. Redesigned for 2018, it has a ceramic bezel and a matching ceramic dial with the wave motif we all love, the skeleton-style bond hands. We have cold enamel infill creating the indices as well as the numerals on the bezel. The 120-click bezel paired with a 300-meter diving depth. The 42mm watch is 13.7 millimeters thick, making it one of the thinner Omega divers. You have the helium escape valve as ever, so you can release helium from the interior of the watch should any build up during a saturation dive. A new feature for the 2018 version of the watch, you get a push-button slider, 9.6 millimeters of incremental adjustment, just like the Planet Ocean, and then you get the age-old fold-out deployment. So you actually get both. You get the slider and you get the fold-out. It's a lot of features. For the first time on a regular series production Diver 300 meter 3-hand date, we have a display case back, caliber 8800, anti-magnetic silicone hairspring, highly shock resistant, 55-hour power reserve, a master chronometer tested not as a bare movement, but as a fully cased up watch, shock resistance, anti-magnetism, water resistance, winding efficiency, power reserve, and of course chronometry. It uses the same ISO 3159 chronometer standard as a COSC watch, but it goes beyond as it is tested in all of the dimensions that I mentioned as a fully assembled watch, not as a bare movement. As you can see, plenty of lume. Note that the bezel pearl and the minutes hand are both contrasting greens, so you can easily distinguish them from the rest of the dial at night. Let's jump to another time-honored sports watch, this one with an even longer legacy, dating back to 1952, late 1952, early 1953, and the arrival of what was at the time the 6202 turnograph. By the end of the 50s, it had become part of the Datejust family, and of course immortalized through its use by the U.S. Air Force Aerobatic Squadron, the Thunderbirds. This is the turnograph. Datejust turnograph, reference 116264, white gold bezel, stainless steel case and bracelet, of course the watch with its rotating bezel, a timing instrument, nicknamed the Thunderbird for its illustrious user base. The watch includes here a matte black dial, and these modern-day Thunderbird dials truly are matte black. They're not the gloss that you get on something like a Submariner or a Sea Dweller. This really is a matte black to give it a little bit more of a vintage 1950s evocative look. Of course, a few well-chosen red highlights. This is not a roulette date. All of the numerals are red on white, so they really pop. 36 millimeters, chronometer certified. Of course, caliber 3135 inside manufacturer movement. Pop the bracelet open, you can see internally it does feature the EasyLink 5mm adjustment system. With 100 meters of water resistance, you can absolutely take it swimming. It is an aquatic capable sports watch. Handsome, looks great on any wrist. It's a unisex option, and again, a true aviation heritage piece that can go toe-to-toe with the likes of Rolex's own GMT, the Omega Speedmaster, and the Breitling Navitimer. It is in that ilk of legend in that category of watch. It's also a Datejust, which means it can totally be your dress watch and your formal timepiece. We'll do a quick lume shot of this one too. You can see no shortage of lume on the Datejust turnograph. Now let's jump to Audemars Piguet. We're going upscale with our sports watches, and we're talking about the 26331OR. Now you can see this is the post-20th anniversary, so post-2017 dial, and it has the smaller sub-seconds down at 6 o'clock, a lovely dark brown dial with bronze overtones. You can see that the case itself is a lovely rose gold and beautifully faceted. This is virgin rose gold. You can see it hasn't been cut, it hasn't been refinished, it hasn't been dulled in any way, and that's important when you're buying a Royal Oak, because a big part of what you're paying for is, yes, the volume of metal, but also the meticulous detailing of the hand-laid finish across every surface of the case, the bezel, the crown profile. You have here shouldered but push-down crowns. So they are not screw downs. Let's just get this thing started up. The crown itself is a screw down. These are shouldered shear guards for the pushers, but unlike previous versions of the Royal Oak chronograph, post 2017, you don't actually have to screw them in or out to operate or seal the chronograph. It's still 50 meters, water resistant, rose gold hands, rose gold indices, lovely concentric pattern, rose accented sub-registers, and you have the Grand Tapisserie, which is the large. The Grand, of course, is the larger of the two pantograph cut dials. The biggest, the Mega, is just a stamped piece, but the standard Royal Oak features the Petite, and this is, of course, the Grand, which is a larger hobnail, but cut the same way using a 19th century mimicry engine to create this textured weave of hobnail, and as you can see, these little interstitial beads, this little rippling between the hobnails. There's a lot of detail to these dials. It's been said each one contains over 20,000 individual bumps. Some of them are large, some of them are small. All of them sit over a 2385 caliber, which is a Panerai Piguet 1185, integrated, automatic, hand-finished, 5-position adjusted, vertical clutch, column wheel chronograph, a high horology movement for a high horology watch. We'll throw it on the wrist. Of course, the Panerai Piguet made by manufacturer Blancpain. The important thing with a watch like this is first, condition, and second, when speaking of pedigree, you have to remember that historically the Royal Oak was all about the case, the bracelet, the dial finishing, the bezel finishing, and the movements inside, variously from the likes of Audemars Piguet, Zeiger, Lecoultre, Blancpain, Dubuis de Praz, in some cases, they have always been high horology movements commensurate to the grade of the watch, and that's exactly what we have here with the 1185, one of the all-time great ultra-thin high horology integrated automatic chronographs. Now we're going to talk about something a little bit more affordable, and this is going to be the most affordable watch on the show today, a piece that is solidly into the luxury sector. This is under $4,000 used. 41 millimeters in stainless steel. This was the original launch platform for the Omega Coaxial 8500, Omega's first purpose-built coaxial movement. It's the DeVille Hour Vision, a lovely watch with sapphire viewports from all four sides of the case. You can actually see to the interior of the movement. The case itself has lovely flowing, polished lugs with a handsome concave taper inboard. You can see that there's a little bit of satination on the side, a little bit of satination that sort of tucks down and in. It's a really graceful watch externally with an almost organic appearance to it. And then you roll onto the dial side and there are these lovely rhodium strakes evocative of Art Deco architecture and industrial design underneath the faceted individual hour indices. It's a really sharp watch and one of the most distinctive designs of the 2000s. 60-hour power reserve, chronometer certified, coaxial escapement, twin mainspring barrels, full balance bridge, and a free sprung balance. There's a hell of a lot to love here, and that's before we even get to the 100-meter water resistance. Yes, on a more water-resistant band, you could take this watch swimming, so there's a lot to love here. A timepiece that is sporty, but still formal. It's your dress watch, it's your casual watch, and what really stands out for me is the unexpected water resistance, adding a dimension of utility here that almost frees you from needing a second watch if you put it on some sort of water-resistant band. It really is a fantastic piece on my 16-centimeter circumference wrist, and the caliber 8500 is a modern classic. One of the first Omega exclusive calibers, still designed and built by ETA, but one of the first few Omega exclusive calibers that put Omega on par with, and in some cases beyond, the technical acumen of Rolex. Certainly back in 2007, the 3135 had nothing on this, and even today it is a very competitive movement. That said, complication is good, and for under $8,000, you can have complication on your Hour Vision with a full factory steel bracelet. Still 41 millimeters, still in stainless steel. This is the Hour Vision annual calendar. This model was first introduced as a special series watch in 2000 and, let's just get that out of the way there, in 2008. And the annual calendar is a very simple system. As you can see, it is a double quick set, it is a month, it is a date, and it need be adjusted only once per year during the jump from February to March. Now you can see this is a little bit more of a low-key take on the hour vision dial, as the gadroons, the strakes, they're actually a blue metallic to match the dial. You still have the faceted and polished indices, so it looks really nice, but it's not quite as loud as the original hour vision. I'd say this one is Chrysler building Art Deco. This one's more like Empire State building Art Deco, a little bit more pared back and reserved, but still very much of the same era and the same sensibility. Now, because the watch is now on a bracelet, you can really take advantage of that 100-meter water resistance and start looking at this as your only watch. On a bracelet, it's going to vent better on a hot day. It's going to be more durable if you live in tropical or hot climates than the strap is going to be. It doesn't overpower the watch. That's the thing, because this is such a strong case design, and you can see the sapphire inserts. The bracelet does not overpower the watch. That occurs sometimes when a watch that, for the most part, was designed for a strap is fitted with a factory bracelet. The bracelet just overpowers it. And a good example of that is probably the Patek Philippe Aquanaut. The bracelet itself is massive and brutal. Not the case here. It's lovely, it's delicate, not in the physical sense, but in the aesthetic sense, with these lovely polished intermediates, a really complex and handsome, flat, slim, and slung design that disappears on the wrist. A wonderful piece offering the same technical chops as the caliber 8500 you just saw. Here we add a few additional refinements. As you can see, we've got the annual calendar complication, and now we've moved into the era of silicone anti-magnetic hairsprings here. So you're getting a little bit more durability with this watch. But again, still the 60-hour power reserve, still a chronometer, double quickset hacking seconds, coaxial tri-level escapement, really realizing the potential of the system envisioned by George Daniels. It didn't work well when grafted onto 7750s and Omega caliber 1120s, but as the 8500, the tri-level coaxial really came into its own with precision, durability, and long service intervals. Let's talk high horology here. Let's go sky high. Let's go to the early days of Roger Dubuis, back when the company was technically known as Sogem, and the trade name for the company was Roger Dubuis. So, started in 1995 by Carlos Diaz, and of course the namesake Roger Dubuis. The company was designed to draw from the best of Swiss historic horology while having a raffishly modern flair. This is Dapper Dan's type watch. It is also very similar to the type of watch that Dubuis himself chose in his later years. He was often seen wearing the rose gold version of this by Retrograde Perpetual. It is the Sympathy 37 by Retrograde Perpetual with a lovely cream lacquered dial in a white gold 37mm case, and you could see the complexity of this case, but that really pales in comparison to the complexity of the inner bezel, the sapphire, and the dial. The later versions of the Sympathy would have used a circular inner bezel, circular sapphire, and circular dial, because this lovely pointed flowing design proved difficult to manufacture and difficult to make water resistant. Now that's the problem for the manufacturer, not for you. This is more beautiful. It's as the designer originally intended, and it is the most sought version of the watch. Now we have a by Retrograde Perpetual calendar system similar to the one that Roger Dubuis and Jean-Marc Viderecht of Agenor designed for the Harry Winston Perpetual calendar of 1989. So this is related to that, but it also draws from the heritage of Patek Philippe, which was one of the original trade stops for Roger Dubuis. He was a longtime specialist at Patek Philippe. So the timepiece, of course, with by Retrograde Perpetual calendar, a moon phase, leap year indicator, coaxial with the month indicator. You can see there's a lovely cream lacquered dial base, and you can see it is a observatory chronometer, Bulletin d'Observatoire. It is a Besançon observatory chronometer certified in France as a fully cased-up watch, not in Switzerland by the COSC, but by the observatory in France. Now, this is RD57. It's based on the Longines L990, also does business as the Breguet 8815. But you could see this design from, I believe, 1978 was a ultra-thin automatic winding twin mainspring barrel movement designed by Longines, designed to be a real premium movement. And the architecture is borrowed from Longines, but the finish is all Dubuis. As you can see, the Poisson de Genève, or the Geneva hallmark, lovely mirrored anglage, immaculate Côte de Genève, engine-turned perlage, satinated wheels, black polished screw heads with chamfered slots in circumference, black polished swan's neck regulator, as well as stud holder. All of this superb. So an observatory chronometer and Geneva hallmark, and a rare early independent Roger Dubuis early watches, think about 1995 to 2000, are highly sought today, as Dubuis really did pioneer the idea of independent horology before Urwerk, before Journe, before MB&F, before Debatoon, before so many of the brands we consider to be the standards in the space today. There was Roger Dubuis, Alain Silberstein, Franck Muller, and then a couple of brave practitioners who worked on commission on occasion, like during the 90s, Philippe Dufour, Vianney Halter, and of course Kari Voutilainen, Sven Anderson, and Vincent Calabrese. All of those were pioneers, but this watch is from a brand that's still very much around to provide parts and service. It's the best of big brands and small independents, as well as vintage and modern watches, and this absolutely qualifies as vintage by today's standards. Now, a lot of folks love the idea of Debatoon, but they don't love the DB28. The open dial is too extravagant. I've heard a lot of Star Trek references because of the specific deltoid shape of the barrel bridge. The DB25 is for you. The DB25 line came out in 2007, and it's been a constant in the catalog, but it really hit its stride in 2018 with the Stradivarius model, a play on the Stradivarius violins. The idea here is that it is likewise an immaculately crafted fine instrument. So the watch here gives you what you really want in high horology. All of the craft refinement and watchmaking, but without the precious metal premium, as this 42mm time-only watch is grade 5 titanium, meaning it is very, very light. It's just over 10 millimeters thick, which means it's very, very thin. Debatoon makes its own cases, its own movements, and its own dials, so all of this is proprietary, and the company, of course, stocked and stacked with engineering innovations. They make their own cases, dials, and movements, but they also create their own artisanal process, meaning they created this process for bluing titanium. If you oxidize titanium, you know that titanium oxide is white, so to make it blue requires a special trade secret that they've developed themselves. We have little cabochon of rose gold outboard in a lovely satin silver, sort of cambered toroidal hour and minutes track. The hands are modified Breguet, rose gold and polished. You can see the cannon pinion at center is mirrored, the details runneth over. Very little branding. Debatoon at the top of the dial. They don't even need to tell you it's Swiss. Of course it is, but you know that already. The center dial features gold leaf applied to create the band of the Milky Way, and then the larger celestial bodies are actually small pegs of white gold that are stuck into drillings on the dial. So all of this is handcrafted and immaculately so. You can even get it customized if you wish to have the look of the night sky over your place of birth on the night you were born. This watch right here is just a lovely and generic Milky Way. And then on the reverse side, you can see one of the signatures of the brand, Côte de Béthune, which are Côte de Genève, but they have two halves to the movement. You can see the two sides, the deltoid-style barrel bridge, and then there are two sides to the base plate. And on each side, the abrasive wheel that lays down the stripes is reversed, which is why the gradient of the stripe is darker outboard on both sides. Normally, it would just be dark on one side all the way across. But because you can see here, the mirror image of each side, each stripe has the darker edge outboard, and the lighter edge facing inboard, and that's only done by reversing the rollers. This is something no one really thinks to do. You can see there's a lot more going on, including satination of the wheels, traditional mile-wide mirrored anglage or beveling, continuous specular finish or poly-noir black polish of the balance bridge. You can see the same treatment on the anchoring point of the shock protection springs. The shock protection springs have been fired blue, and you can see there are 1, 2, 3 points of shock protection on the balance. You have the balance Inca block at center, so you have the balance capstone protected by an Inca block spring. Then you have these two flanking springs, and the idea, yes, is to add durability and make it more shock resistant, but the real goal is to more rapidly recenter the balance staff inside the balance cup to improve chronometry and get the watch back to normal timekeeping as quick as possible after a shock. There are over 8 patented Debatoon balance wheels. This one featuring blued titanium wheel with white gold weights outboard. It does two things. It moves most of the mass out to the edge, and then it also has a very low coefficient of thermal reaction, which means it doesn't tend to expand or contract in hot or cold. This is very important for precise timekeeping. There is a silicon escape wheel that improves precision as well as power reserve, and as you can see, a bolt-fixed rose gold plate declaring this is a DB25V Starry Various 6-day manual wind power reserve, and no tricks or shortcuts are applied to get that exceptional power reserve. It still beats away at 4 Hz, 8 beats per second, no slow beat rates to draw out the nearly 1 week of reserve damage. There are at least 5, possibly 6 patents protecting this watch, starting with the dial, where you have the blued titanium, turning it all over, twin self-adjusting barrels, you have the balance, you have the shock protection, and then you have a 2-element hairspring. It's actually 2 elements clamped together, shaped by hand, that allow it to be flat and thin like a flat hairspring is, but also shock resistant like a flat hairspring is, and able to beat concentrically with centered mass the way an overcoil is. So this watch is simply full of surprises. A very simple watch with 2 hands that has a complicated backstory, and again, Debatoon of L'Auberson has made less than 3,000 watches since its founding in 2002. This 42mm gem in grade 5 tie fits under a cuff, fits on a small wrist, and of course they're only making 150 watches a year right now, so exclusivity is assured. Remember, you're looking at about 5,500 a year from Richard Mille and about 950 a year from F. Pijorn, so it really gives you a sense of the scale and the restriction of supply with Debatoon. This isn't a particularly rare watch, but it's a great one. Back in 2002, when IWC launched the original Big Pilots watch, people sort of did a double take. No one could believe that such a huge watch was being offered in earnest by a major manufacturer. And in fact, the watch that inspired it, the 1940 Baubachtungsuhr, the B-Uhr, was 55 millimeters. So the 46.2 Big Pilots watch is actually fairly tame by historical standards. Nevertheless, at about 57 millimeters from lug to lug, this watch is huge. You could wear it on a wrist of my size if you like the look of a truly oversized timepiece. Again, it's descended from something that was designed to be worn over a flight suit, so you get a sense of why it looks so big on a bare wrist. If you want it to look proportional, you're going to need a wrist of at least 17 centimeters, preferably 18, so that you don't have that lug overlap. But rest assured, if it looks big, that's kind of intentional. This was always supposed to be a watch whose style was huge, a little bit like the Luminor submersibles, never intended to be proportional to a normal human wrist. Now, of course, this is the 5916 edition Le Petit Prince, reference 5009-16. The model features a caliber 51111, 7-day power reserve, manufacturer caliber automatic with bidirectional pawl-based peloton winding system. It is a power reserve, as you can see, with a 7-day power reserve indicator. It takes about 108 turns of the crown, from what I understand, to fully energize the mainspring, which is why you're just going to wear the watch and let it wind itself. You have hacking seconds, you have a quick set date, you have a 5-position adjusted movement that's free spring for durability with a handmade overcoil hairspring. So some surprising features here. As you can see, the crown is immense. It's over 10 millimeters in its own right, so everything about this watch built on a nightmare scale, but thoughtfully detailed right down to the hairline bevels, the polished edges at the edge of the lugs. We've got a riveted, oversized calfskin strap, because that is aviator style. Make it huge, rivet it together, and then of course calfskin is the material of choice for a pilot's watch. Full clasp here, protection against accidentally dropping your watch. You can see it's polished and media blasted inside, and then it's satin finished and polished externally. It is a screw down crown. It is 60 meters water resistant, and in theory, on a water resistant band, you can surface swim this watch. So there's a decent degree of utility built into it. The right strap, and you can take it swimming. Quick loom shot here. Plenty of loom. 4 corners, and you can see a little bit of parapodia up at the top as the 12 o'clock index looks a little bit like a face. Blue dial, sunburst, gorgeous, broadsword style hands, and a very evocative instrument style watch. This is one of the core IWC watches. I always say if you want to buy the IWC, you're going to get yourself a Big Pilot, a Mark Series, or a Portuguese, and this is very much in that canon, that pantheon of core IWC models. Okay, 2 ways to wear your sports watch. One is bold, one is gold. Actually, I'm going to say one is bold, one is gold and bold. And let's start with that one first, because this is the latest version of the Rolex Submariner in yellow gold. Full bracelet, full case, yellow gold, the oldest gold, and for a lot of folks, the choice, as this is simply the loudest version of Rolex's most famous watch. Oh, sure, you could get gem set, but most of the iced out Rolex subs tend to be in white metal, so this one really pushes the limits with a metallic sunburst blue dial, yellow gold hands and indices, yellow gold bezel, blue insert with frosted yellow gold metal deposits to create the indices and the numerals, full oyster bracelet in yellow gold. Still, of course, a reasonable size, although it's 41 millimeters. I haven't been able to measure a dimension on this watch that is larger than 0.7 millimeters larger than the previous model. So if you could wear that, you could wear this. They're the same distance lug to lug, and they're also the same thickness. So the fit on the wrist really is exactly the same. Now I'm throwing this one on my wrist, and you can see my 16 centimeter circumference wrist wears this 300 meter dive watch well. It now has a nigh 3-day power reserve at 70 hours with a next generation Rolex 3235 movement. It still has a wonderful bezel that's both crisp and creamy, and I don't know how Rolex achieves both. It's a little bit of mechanical alchemy. Let's have a listen. It just glides. Of course, it has that ceramic insert for scratch resistance, and it is still very much a dive watch. We have the glide lock system internally, 20 millimeters of adjustment in 2 millimeter increments, very smooth. You can use it for adjusting sizing or fit, but you can also use it as an all or nothing full extension over a dive suit. You can see the use of the half link, so you have another dimension of micro sizing. Full size links, glide lock, half link. You've got plenty of options here. The watch is still slim. You can see that little trip lock crown in gold, because a trip lock crown in gold has small flanking dots and one large center dot. If you were to reverse that, it would be a trip lock in platinum. The timepiece has plenty of lumen. We're going to see that now. Rolex's proprietary Chromolite Blue. I should also mention Rolex has its own foundry, which means not only does Rolex make its own dials, movements, cases, bracelets, and clasps, Rolex smelts its own gold. It makes its own lubricants and its own shock protection. Few brands are as vertically integrated as Rolex, and when you buy this watch, you get a watch that is all Rolex. That said, for a whole lot less money, you can have just as much fun from a brand that only makes about 10,000 watches a year, from Glasuta Original, and launched at Basel World 2008. This is the Sport Evolution Perpetual Calendar. 42.5 millimeters in steel. It wears a little bit smaller than that thanks to short, sharply tapered lugs and a reasonably thin case at just over 14 millimeters thick. You can see on my wrist, it comes nowhere near the edge of my wrist. We'll zoom out a little bit, get a better sense of this one in proportion, because I think when you hear 42.5, you get the sense that the watch is bigger than it is. There it is on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist, looking for all the world really like a 41. Wearing comfortable, sitting secure. If this bracelet were properly sized down, I could happily wear this daily. Both aesthetically and ergonomically pleasing. It's a 100-meter watch, so it's a real swimmable sports watch. As you can see, all steel construction. The bracelet's beautifully made with every link removable, so you're going to get the right fit. But then you also have this system built by IWC's bracelet and clasp supplier, Broglioli of Ticino, southern Switzerland. You have that little incremental adjustment system. You'll see this also, for example, on Moser and now Longa sports watches, so you get that little bit of incremental adjustability. It's a twin trigger release system, so it doesn't pop open unless you want it to. It is a rotating bezel, bidirectional. The idea here is that you can offset from your city of reference, so wherever you are, if you are in New York or Bangkok. By the way, it lists effectively these polar oppositions, so each one of these cities is exactly opposite the globe and 12 hours removed from the other. Now, what you can see more easily is how many hours removed you are from your current location. So if you're at New York and you want to find out what time it is in Chicago or Denver, you just move backwards 1 hour, 2 hours. Or if you want to find out what time it is in, for example, Caracas, Venezuela, that's a little bit of an anachronism. Caracas would not be included on a city ring these days, but it was back in 2008. Of course, you've got Rio and Tokyo and Sydney, but of course, Sydney quite a ways away. You would be going from Rio to South Georgia, perhaps. All of this in a case with a perpetual calendar movement. So you've got a real high horology complication here, and it's my favorite kind of perpetual calendar, where you have a aperture style display. So you have your day, your date, and it's a double-digit panorama datum. The month, you've got your leap year phase indicator, and then you've got a moon phase. And of course, it's a sports watch, which means it's pretty well loomed. A manufacturer movement with a high horology complication and a swimmable depth rating. This is not something you see often. Geo does not make many watches, and of the few watches it produced during the 2000s, right up till 2011, very few of the Sport Evo watches were made, with the perpetual calendar being one of the rarest. This is a true handmade watch for basically new Rolex Yachtmaster money. So let's talk about independent horology again. Now let's talk about FP Journe. Now this is a lovely watch. I don't know what you're seeing on the screen, but it is a rose-inflected dial. So you've got that lovely rose-tinted dial. You've got the 38mm platinum case. You've got a 4th series tourbillon remontoire. And as you can see, I've left it relatively unwound. So you can see what happens with the remontoire mechanism when the watch is not fully energized. For about 28 hours of its power reserve, the remontoire acts as a deadbeat sort of indication of function on the dial side, and then on the reverse side it's a little linear spring that acts as a buffer between the barrel and the escapement. So for 28 hours the spring takes 1 second's worth of energy from the barrel and then distributes it to the escapement. So every second the escapement receives the same amount of energy, which for 28 hours allows the balance to maintain constant amplitude. The remontoire system, invented in the 1930s by, I believe, Christian Gaffner, is a successor to the old fusee and chain that allows a more precise metering of energy without the complexity and the bulk and the inherent inefficiencies of hundreds of little chain components driving 2 large wheels. So here we have that remontoire maintaining constant amplitude, which allows the watch to be adjusted in 6 positions, and in conjunction with a free-sprung architecture and an overcoil hairspring, which is not universal to Journe watches. This is able to be a very accurate wristwatch tourbillon, and not every wristwatch tourbillon is designed with chronometry in mind. Now you can see once I wind it, the power reserve moves backwards because, like a marine chronometer, it indicates 0 for 0 hours since fully wound. So now that it's fully wound, you can see that jumping seconds system that gives you a little bit of insight into the remontoire. You know it's operating, and now you have constant amplitude of the balance until the hand reaches about nay on the dial. Of course, solid gold dial, platinum case. This is the brass movement era of FP Journe. You can see there's a lot of calling cards of old Journe. You have the brass movement, which was discontinued in mid-2004. You have the tourbillon remontoire, which was discontinued in mid-2004. You have the 38mm case, which was discontinued after 2015. You have the stamping of the year the case was made next to the reference T. That was discontinued after about mid-2005. And of course you have the hallmarks of France as well as Switzerland on the case back, and the maker's mark of Eleanor of Paris metropolitan area. Eleanor was bought up by Journe and moved to Geneva to become his case factory, Boîtier de Genève. So about mid-2008 you stopped seeing these Eleanor cases. So a lot of throwback elements on this watch, and as you can see, a higher degree of hand finishing than you'll find on, for example, a standard Octa, as you have the black polishing of the remontoire cock, black polishing of the half bridge for the tourbillon, black polishing of the filigree or wire style cage, black polished screws on the dial side, engine turning visible from the dial side, black polishing of the steel bezel that frames the time, a satination of the manually drilled bezel that frames the tourbillon, and then of course on the reverse side the remontoire, a unique constant force system, as this was the first family of watches to include a remontoire and a tourbillon in a wristwatch format. Throw it on the wrist in the 38mm size is lovely. It's less than 45mm from lug to lug across the wrist, so it's real compact, a wonderful unisex option if you wish it to be in a traditionally sized timepiece. These early Journe tourbillon remontoire from the Souscription through the 4th series and the Ruthenium models, they got a 38-piece send-off in 2015 made of steel. All told, though, very, very few. If you add all of those together, you wind up with fewer than 600 units. So these are highly collectible, and they are considered vintage watches today. This watch right here, Patek Philippe Calatrava weekly calendar, 40mm in steel with lovely tapered teardrop lugs, stepped lugs no less. A timepiece debuted in 2019. It features a weekly calendar, so you have this lovely font designed after the handwriting of a Patek employee who provided model numerals and letters, and then of course we have the day of the week, we have the date, and we have the month. So it is a weekly calendar, blackened white gold hands, blackened white gold indices. This was a debut platform for the new caliber 26-330, so you get a hacking second system. And of course, the watch in steel at 40 millimeters is a very durable and everyday wearable watch. You can see the movement is nicely made, 6-position adjusted, anti-magnetic silicone hairspring, and of course it has that hacking seconds function. Throw it on the wrist, and a little bit like the Journe, it's an easy and obvious choice. A bit bigger. I'm not going to claim it's a petite watch, the way the Journe is a little bit delicate in its dimensions. This is a nice, properly sized, modern men's dress watch that I feel is neither oversized nor undersized. 40 millimeters in a dress watch today feels just about right, and a very, very highly sought piece. 42 millimeters in a Panerai, also highly sought. This is a V series, so 2019 PAM973. It's a Panerai Luminor submersible 1950, 42 millimeters in steel with a 3-day power reserve. You can see the image of the SLC or PIG, the Maiale, the manned torpedo that would have been used by Decimo Flotilla frogmen during World War II, principally in the raid on Alexandria, but there were a couple of others. Alexandria is the best known, though, because it was the most successful. So whether or not you are into fascist frogmen, it's kind of a cool history. You have the quick release system that Panerai uses on its premium watches. You depress the plunger there, and then you push the bar through, and that releases the system and spares you a test of your skills with screwdrivers against this beautifully finished set of lugs. We also have, of course, the Panerai locking lever with the little bearing in it. That's been there since 2007 to make the cam action of the locking lever a little bit smoother. And of course, we've got hacking seconds and a quick set date, and a 42 millimeter diver that wears a lot better on my wrist than the bigger examples. So this timepiece, a lovely profile. If you have that smaller wrist of 16 centimeters circumference, this is really the best Panerai diver for you. It's a 60-click bezel, but it is deliciously chunky. And as you can see, as with Omega, Panerai choosing to create differential lume on the bezel pearl and the minute hand so you can more easily line them up when you need to read them in the dark. It's a lot easier to be able to distinguish the minutes from the bezel when everything else on the dial is green and the pearl and the minute hand are blue. If you're going to buy a Debatoon DB25 Titan Hawk, I recommend you buy the first generation model. Made from 2012 to 2017, it was more sophisticated in more ways than one. First, we talk of the dial. And the dial here includes a radial date with a quick set. The second generation does not include that. Now, there's also a more capable automatic movement, as this early version featured a 6-day automatic winding power reserve. You can see the solid disc balance wheel in there. It is silicone inboard and a solid white gold rim outboard. That is patented. It also has the 2-part clamped hairspring we spoke of earlier. So the current automatic version of the watch has a 60-hour power reserve. This one has a 6-day power reserve. 43 millimeters in grade 5 titanium. It's lighter than steel, but it's also more scratch resistant than steel. 6-day power reserve, great if you've got a collection of watches and you rotate through, and maybe a watch will go 3 or 4 days without being worn. You don't have to worry about this one starting up. It's only 12.2 millimeters thick, so it's going to keep ticking away, and it's going to do so underneath a dress cuff or a short sleeve. It's appropriate for either. It's a timepiece that is a little bit shorter across the wrist than a standard DB28, so it does have shorter lugs across the wrist, making it a superb fit on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist. They are not making any more of these Generation 1 Titan Hawks. And because Debatoon uses, of course, its own cases, dials, and movements, this watch has an awesome pedigree. And you can really see they use their micro-light engraving on the dial center. This is their alternative to a traditional guilloche. It's a little bit more contemporary, but it is not stamped. It's still reductively engraved on a lathe. The hands are blued titanium, another one of their patented processes, and you can see the whole silver dial is printed in blue. I like the intensity of the black dial version, but I concede that the silver dial with the blueprint is the easier of the two standard models to read. So go with this first generation DB27 Titan Hawk. I can't tell you how many of these shows have ended with a Zeitwerk of some description, but I feel like every time I've had a Zeitwerk, it has always been the capstone to a great show. This, launched in 2011, is the Zeiger Striking Time, 44.2 millimeters in rose gold. It has a sterling silver dial that's then galvanized to the silver white color, so even the dial is precious metal. This was the first vocal Zeiger. It has the jumping hours, the jumping minutes and tens of minutes, 36-hour power reserve with a power reserve indicator, German silver movement visible on the dial side. You can actually see the movement from both sides. This time bridge is made of that nickel copper zinc alloy with the copper giving it the golden hue. We have two strikers, black polished, and they strike black polished gongs on the hours as well as the quarters. And if you just want to play with it, you can do so with the little pusher down at about, I guess, 430 on the dial. Turn it all over. We have caliber L043 here in its .2 iteration, the second version of this monumental movement. This is a feast for the eyes, but also for the intellect, as there's a stopworks that will prevent the watch from running if it has too little energy to jump the minutes. There's a pinwheel that will slow down the transmission of energy after it jumps the minutes, entering what is a double third wheel hairspring remontoir d'égalité system. Unlike the Journe, which tops off every second, this one tops off with the locking lever once per minute. So you'll see the locking lever begin to move, and then it'll mete out 1 minute's worth of energy to that hairspring. And then the second third wheel on the bottom of the sandwich will turn the fourth wheel, which in turn will transmit energy to the escape wheel and the balance. So you can see the balance is enormous, and it beats away at an aesthetically pleasing 18,000 vibrations per hour. There is a stop seconds function and a quick set. Black polish galore. We have both black polished and blued screws, glasuta stripes across the bridges, satination across the wheels, engine turning on the base plate, mirrored beveling on every surface, including the steel components of the constant force device. So lots to love, and of course, if you want to just play with the system, you can also use the quick set to rapidly change the time. If you love what you see here, reach out to me, Tim Mosso at thewatchbox.com, for purchase and pricing details.